It's still my company. My father didn't look at me when he said it. He was staring at the glass wall of the conference room, hands clasped behind his back, posture rigid with a confidence he hadn't earned in years. The city reflected back at him like an audience that still believed the legend. I sat across from him, legal folder resting neatly on my lap, spine straight, expression neutral. And I nodded. Because correcting him right then would have ruined everything. They didn't know what I had already done. The meeting had been his idea. A check-in, he'd called it. A way to remind everyone, especially me, that he was still in charge, still relevant, still the man who built everything from nothing. He liked saying that. From nothing. As if I hadn't been there for the last decade, quietly turning chaos into structure while he told stories about the early days. The board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. No one contradicted him. No one ever did. I appreciate the updates, Dad continued, finally turning around. But let's be clear, strategic direction still comes from me. His eyes landed on me then. Briefly. Like a formality. I smiled politely. Of course, I said. That word again. Of course. It had carried me further than arguments ever could. To everyone else in the room, I was still his daughter. To some, I was still learning. To him, I was still filling in. But none of them had read past page 3. After the meeting, Dad clapped a hand on my shoulder. You handled that well, he said. You've always been good at the details. I met his eyes. Someone has to be, I replied. He laughed. You sound like your mother. That wasn't the compliment he thought it was. The truth was, my father had always been brilliant at beginnings. Ideas. Vision. Momentum. But middles bored him. And endings. He avoided those altogether. That's where I came in. Years ago, when his health scare forced him to step back, temporarily, I'd stepped forward permanently. Not officially. Not loudly. But effectively. I negotiated supplier contracts. Rewrote governance policies. Implemented systems he dismissed as bureaucracy. He signed everything. Rarely read anything. Trusting me the way powerful men trust people they underestimate. The document in my folder wasn't dramatic. No bold print. No red ink. Just a standard ownership transition clause embedded in a restructuring agreement he'd approved 6 months earlier. The clause he'd skipped. The clause that mattered. That afternoon, I returned to my office and closed the door. I placed the folder on my desk and opened it slowly. The transfer form sat neatly inside. Pre-filled. Signed. Dated. All it needed was filing. My phone buzzed. A message from legal. Ready when you are. I exhaled slowly. Not relief. Focus. That evening, Dad called me. I've been thinking, he said. We should delay that transition talk. No need to rush. I held the phone to my ear, staring at the city lights. There's no rush, I agreed. And smiled. The next morning, he walked into the office like always. Confident. Loud. Certain. Greeting people like a king returning to his castle. He passed my desk and paused. Oh, remind me to review that restructuring paperwork later, he said casually. Just to be safe. I looked up at him. Already handled, I said. He waved it off. Good. You always do. And walked away. At 11:47 a.m., I hit submit. The system processed the filing without ceremony. No alarms. No announcement. Just confirmation. Ownership transfer complete. At noon, Dad stood up in the lunchroom and made a toast. To longevity, he said. And to keeping things in the family. People clapped. I raised my glass too. Because technically, they already were. What I didn't realize then was how violently the truth would collide with his certainty once the paperwork caught up with reality. And how loudly he would insist it was still his company, long after it wasn't. The strangest part wasn't filing the transfer. It was how easy it was. No confrontation. No raised voices. No dramatic moment where someone tried to stop me. Just a system doing exactly what it was designed to do, because someone years ago had designed it carefully. That someone had been me. When my father first mentioned succession planning, it was after his second hospital stay. He sat in his leather chair, pale but defiant, insisting it was nothing serious while his hands shook just enough to tell the truth. "I don't want to step away," he'd said. "But we should prepare. Just in case. Just in case." Those 3 words had unlocked everything. We hired consultants, lawyers, accountants. My father hated every meeting. Too slow. Too cautious. Too many questions. "You handle it," he told me repeatedly. "You're better at this stuff." So I did. I structured the transition in stages. Voting rights first. Operational control second. Ownership last. Incremental. Logical. Invisible. He signed where I told him to sign. Trusted me to keep it in the family. The clause he missed wasn't hidden. It was simply boring. A contingency trigger embedded in a reorganization schedule. In the event the acting executive assumes full operational responsibility for a continuous 6-month period. I remembered explaining it to him. "This is just a safeguard," I'd said. "In case something happens." He'd waved his hand. "Fine. Fine. If it makes everyone feel better." It had. Especially me. The 6 months came and went quietly. He stopped coming in every day. Then stopped reviewing reports. Then stopped asking questions. By the time he noticed how much had changed, it already felt normal. That's the trick with power. If you take it slowly enough, people don't realize it's gone. After I filed the transfer, nothing happened immediately. No alerts. No calls. No sense of finality. I went back to work. Answered emails. Approved budgets. Took meetings. The company ran exactly the same. Which was the point. 2 days later, the bank called. Routine confirmation. "Just verifying the authorized signatory," the representative said. "We have you listed as sole owner." I thanked her and hung up. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't need to. My father found out the following week. Not from me. From someone who assumed he already knew. That was almost poetic. He stormed into my office just before noon. Didn't knock. Didn't greet. "This is a mistake," he said, slapping a printed email onto my desk. I glanced at it. A routine notice. Ownership update acknowledged. "There's no mistake," I said calmly. His face reddened. "You filed something," he said. "Without telling me." I folded my hands. "I filed something you signed," I replied. He laughed sharply. "You think paperwork changes reality?" he asked. "This is still my company." I looked at him then. Really looked. At the man who had built something remarkable, and then refused to let it evolve beyond himself. "It changed the only reality that matters," I said. "The legal one." He paced. "You tricked me," he accused. I shook my head. "I explained it," I said. "You chose not to listen." "That's not the same thing," he snapped. "It is," I replied. "In business." He leaned over my desk, voice low. "You wouldn't exist here without me," he said. I didn't flinch. "And you wouldn't still be here without me," I replied. That stopped him. He left without another word. The door closed softly behind him. I sat there for a long time afterward. Not shaking. Not celebrating. Just steady. What surprised me most wasn't his anger. It was his confusion. He genuinely believed authority was permanent. That being first meant being final. He never considered that succession could happen without ceremony. Without permission. The board meeting that followed was brief. They already knew. They'd watched the shift happen in real time. This was just acknowledgement. One of them smiled at me afterward. "You handled that with restraint," she said. I nodded. "I learned from the best," I replied. That night, I went home and poured a glass of wine. I didn't toast. I didn't call anyone. I just sat by the window and let the silence settle. Because I knew. This wasn't over. Not emotionally. Not for him. What I didn't realize then was that my father would try to reclaim control the only way he knew how. Publicly. And that would force me to prove, once and for all, that ownership isn't about who speaks the loudest. It's about who signs last. He chose the worst possible stage. Which meant, of course, it was the most him thing he could have done. The annual industry summit had always been his favorite event. Bright lights, familiar faces, people who still spoke his name with reverence. He loved the way the room leaned toward him when he talked, the way history did half the work for him. And this year, he showed up like nothing had changed. Like the transfer hadn't happened. Like the filings didn't exist. Like the company was still an extension of his identity. I watched from the side of the ballroom as he took the stage. No introduction needed. They applauded anyway. "It's good to see so many familiar faces," he began, smiling broadly. "This company has been my life's work." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. I felt it then. Not panic, not anger. Anticipation. "They say leadership is about knowing when to let go," he continued. "But some things never stop being yours." He paused and looked directly at me. "This," he said, gesturing vaguely, "is still my company." The applause came fast. Automatic. Uninformed. I didn't move. People turned to look at me. Some curious. Some confused. Some already sensing the fracture. I smiled politely. And stayed silent. Because documents don't interrupt speeches. They wait. Afterward, he was surrounded immediately. Handshakes. Compliments. Old allies slapping his back like nothing had changed. I drifted through the room quietly, accepting nods, fielding questions I didn't fully answer. "Are you excited about the next phase?" "It must be special working with your father. He still seems very much in charge." I smiled. "He's very passionate," I said. Which was true. The first call came before I even left the venue. Legal. He made a public claim of ownership. I exhaled slowly. "Yes," I replied. "I expected that. Do you want to respond?" I looked across the room. At my father, laughing loudly, basking in borrowed certainty. "No," I said. "Not yet." The second call came from a journalist. Careful tone. Neutral language. "There seems to be some confusion regarding leadership," she said. "Would you like to clarify?" I considered it. Then said, "The filings speak for themselves." She paused. "That's definitive," she said. "Yes," I replied. "It is." My father cornered me near the exit. "That was unnecessary," he said sharply. I met his eyes. "You made it necessary," I replied. He scoffed. "People know the truth." I nodded. "They will," I said. The next morning, the article dropped. No headline drama. Just facts. Ownership records filed last week confirm operational and controlling interest transferred to my name. That was it. No spin. No judgment. Just reality. My phone lit up. Board members. Investors. Partners. Some apologetic. Some impressed. Some quietly relieved. One message stood out. "You handled that exactly right." I closed my eyes for a moment. Because restraint is rarely recognized in real time. But it lasts longer. My father didn't call that day. Or the next. Then, on the third day, he sent an email. Not to me. To everyone. He wrote about legacy, about intent, about how paperwork couldn't replace vision, about how transitions were meant to be collaborative, not unilateral. He didn't mention my name. He didn't mention the clause. He didn't mention that he'd signed it himself. I replied to the entire thread. One sentence. All ownership and governance decisions have been executed in accordance with the agreement signed on March 14th. Then I attached the document. Page 5. Highlighted. No commentary. No emotion. Just proof. The replies stopped. That evening, I found him sitting alone in the old conference room. Lights off. City glowing behind him. He didn't look up when I entered. You embarrassed me, he said quietly. I sat across from him. You embarrassed yourself, I replied, by pretending nothing had changed. He shook his head slowly. I built this, he said again. You don't erase that with paperwork. I leaned forward. No, I said gently. But you can give it away by not paying attention. He finally looked at me. Really looked. Not as his daughter. Not as his helper. As the person who now held what he'd once guarded too tightly. When did this happen? He asked. I thought about that. Over years, I said. While you were telling stories. He laughed softly. I taught you too well, he said. I smiled. You taught me what not to do, I replied. What I didn't realize then was that this confrontation would force him into a choice he'd avoided his entire life. To step back with dignity. Or to fight until there was nothing left to protect. He didn't choose dignity. I think a small part of him wanted to, but pride is louder than instinct when it's been fed for decades. The last attempt came disguised as concern. That was the most dangerous version of him. It started with a meeting request. Not from him. From the board. I knew immediately. When people who already understand the facts ask for alignment, it's because someone is refusing to accept them. I didn't object. I welcomed it. Because the truth doesn't change under fluorescent lights. The morning of the meeting, my father arrived early. Earlier than anyone else. He sat at the head of the table like muscle memory could override documentation. I took a seat 2 chairs down and placed my folder neatly in front of me. I didn't correct him. Not yet. When the board filed in, the tension was visible. No small talk. No jokes. One director cleared her throat. We're here, she said carefully, to resolve ongoing confusion about leadership authority. My father nodded vigorously. Exactly, he said. There's been a misunderstanding. I watched him. The way he spoke, confident, rehearsed, told me he'd practiced this speech. I never intended to relinquish control, he continued. I trusted my daughter to help, not to replace. There it was. The framing. Helpful. Grateful. Still subordinate. I felt something tighten in my chest. Not anger. Sadness. One board member glanced at me. I didn't speak. I let him finish. I built this company, my father said. I guided every major decision. This paperwork, he waved a dismissive hand, was administrative. Not intent. The room was quiet when he stopped. He leaned back, satisfied. Certain. The chairwoman turned to me. Would you like to respond? I nodded once. And slid my folder across the table. Inside were 3 things. A timeline. Signed agreements. Operational records. I don't dispute that my father built the company, I said calmly. I dispute that intent only exists when it's spoken aloud. My father scoffed. I stood then. Not to dominate. To be seen. For the last 18 months, I continued, I've served as acting executive, by his request. I looked at him. He didn't deny it. I've signed contracts. Managed crises. Secured financing. All while he stepped back. One director nodded slowly. The agreement he's referencing, I said, tapping the folder, was designed to protect the company in exactly this scenario. My father leaned forward. You manipulated language, he snapped. I met his eyes. You ignored it, I replied. Silence fell like a verdict. The board's legal counsel spoke next. Measured. Clear. The transfer was valid, she said. The trigger conditions were met. The filing was lawful. My father's jaw tightened. You're taking her side, he said bitterly. There are no sides, the counsel replied. There is governance. That's when he changed tactics. He turned toward me, not the board. You wanted this, he said quietly. You always did. I didn't look away. I wanted stability, I replied. You wanted control. He shook his head. You could have waited, he said. I would have handed it to you. I felt a sting then. Because part of me had once believed that. Maybe, I said. But you never practiced letting go. He stood abruptly. This is my company, he said again. Louder now. And I won't be erased by fine print. The chairwoman folded her hands. No one is erasing you, she said. But this conversation is over. He froze. What? He asked. She continued. Your continued public claims are destabilizing, she said. Effective immediately, you'll step away from all executive functions. The words hung in the air. He looked around, waiting for support. It didn't come. I felt a strange ache then. Not victory. Loss. Not of him, but of what he could have been in this moment. He could have said yes. He could have said I trust you. He didn't. This isn't right, he whispered. The chairwoman looked at me. Do you wish to add anything? I shook my head. No speeches. No explanations. Because the decision wasn't emotional. It was final. When the meeting ended, he lingered. Everyone else filed out quietly. He stood by the window, shoulders slumped. I didn't think you'd go this far, he said. I gathered my papers. I didn't think you'd force me to, I replied. He turned to me. What happens now? He asked. I paused. Now, I said, you decide who you are without the company. He laughed softly. I don't know how to do that. I nodded. I know. He left without another word. And for the first time since I'd filed the transfer, I felt the weight of it fully. Because power isn't heavy when you take it. It's heavy when you realize someone else can't carry it anymore. What I didn't realize then was that the company would feel different almost immediately. Calmer. Stronger. And that the final act of this story wouldn't be about him at all, but about what I chose to build once his shadow was finally gone. The silence after he left was immediate. Not awkward. Not tense. Functional. The kind of silence that settles when a room finally stops bracing for impact. I stood alone in the boardroom for a long moment, staring at the empty chair at the head of the table, the one he'd occupied for decades. It looked smaller now. Just another seat. No aura. No gravity. Power doesn't linger when it's no longer fed. The first week without him was efficient. Decisions that once stalled for days moved forward in hours. Meetings ended on time. People stopped glancing toward the door before speaking honestly. No one said his name. Not out of fear. Out of relief. I didn't announce changes right away. I watched first. I listened. I paid attention to the places where his presence had created hesitation, where people had learned to wait instead of act. Then, slowly, I removed the waiting. We streamlined approvals. Clarified authority. Documented processes he'd kept in his head like leverage. The company didn't rebel. It exhaled. One afternoon, a senior manager stopped me in the hallway. I didn't realize how much we were compensating for him, she said quietly. I nodded. Neither did he, I replied. My father didn't come back. Not to the office. Not to meetings. Not even to collect the things he'd left behind. His former assistant, boxed them up. Photos, plaques, framed magazine covers. I signed the release form and watched them disappear into an elevator. That was it. Decades of authority reduced to cardboard and tape. People ask me now if it was hard, taking the company from my own father, standing firm while he insisted it was still his. I tell them the truth. The hard part wasn't taking it, I say. It was realizing he'd already given it away. He called me once. Weeks later. Late. His voice sounded unfamiliar, stripped of command. I don't know who I am without it, he said. I closed my eyes. I tried to tell you, I replied. I thought you were just helping, he said. I was, I said. Until helping meant holding everything together alone. He didn't argue. That was new. We didn't reconcile. We didn't fight either. Some relationships don't end in explosions. They end in understanding that comes too late to change the outcome. The company entered its next phase quietly. No rebrand. No victory lap. Just steadier growth. Clearer strategy. Less noise. When reporters asked about the transition, I kept my answers simple. It was planned, I said. Just not acknowledged. On the anniversary of the filing, I found the original agreement in my drawer. The one he hadn't read. I ran my fingers over the page where his signature sat. Bold, confident, unquestioning. He'd trusted me. Just not enough to listen. Sometimes, late in the evening, when the office is empty and the city lights glow beyond the glass, I think about that moment in the conference room. The way he said it. It's still my company. Not as a question. As a belief. He never imagined a world where that belief wasn't enough. But belief doesn't move banks. Belief doesn't satisfy boards. Belief doesn't override ink. Action does. Attention does. Reading does. I didn't take the company from him. I took responsibility when he stopped carrying it. And that made all the difference. The company is stronger now. Not because I'm better than him. But because I learned what he never did. That leadership isn't about being remembered. It's about knowing when to step aside before everything depends on someone else doing it for you. He once told me, details don't matter as much as vision. He was wrong. Details are where ownership lives. And while he was claiming something out loud, I was filing it quietly. They didn't know what I had already done. But by the time it mattered, the system did. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this.